Welcome to the AVAIL podcast, where we dig deep and talk about the art of leadership. My name is Virgil Sierra, and today we're sitting down with Doug Sauder. Doug has served as lead pastor of Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale, and its regional campuses since May 2014. Before his role as lead pastor, he was a founding member and president of 4Kids and an associate pastor at Calvary Chapel since January 2000. He also serves as a leading voice in Church United, a movement of gospel-centered, city-focused churches in South Florida uniting for the sake of mission. In this episode, Doug will share about leading from a healthy soul, building and rebuilding culture, and the importance of unity amongst pastors and churches. So lean in, leaders, and let's get started. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the AVAIL podcast, where we dig deep and talk about the art called leadership. My name is Virgil Sierra, lead pastor of Vertical Church, aka Iglesia Vertical in South Florida, where we are one church, two languages. I'm your host for the AVAIL podcast, where I get the privilege and opportunity and blessing to speak to amazing leaders, pastors, authors, Christians who are making an impact and influencing in their communities. And today I have the privilege of interviewing a great pastor, a great leader, but also a great friend, Pastor Doug Sauder from Calvary Chapel in Fort Lauderdale. Pastor Doug, it's good to have you on the AVAIL podcast. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great, Virgil. And now that I'm talking to you, I'm feeling even better.
Hey, there's a lot of history that you and I have had down here as pastors that are co-laboring in the South Florida region. There's a lot of basketball that you and I have played together throughout these last couple. A lot of
things we can't talk about in this podcast, flying elbows and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Hey, all I know is that I feel happier and better when I'm on your team playing basketball. Pastor Doug,
same way.
Before we jump into some leadership talk, and I think that the experiences that you've had and your leadership journey is rich in both experience and understanding for us. I'd love for our AVAIL audience just to get to know you a little bit better. So if you can share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I've been married to my wife, Suzanne, for 31 years. We are raising 3 young men now. They're 22, 24, 26. So we're empty nesters, but parenting never ends. And my wife and I were foster parents for a while. So we have lots of kids that are sort of in our lives and call us mom, dad, uncle, aunt. And so we love the ministry expression of the gospel through family, through marriage, through kids, through an open table, and just keeping it real. So that's a little bit about us. I grew up in South Florida. I was born and raised here. Funny story, I grew up 8 blocks from my wife. We went to the same elementary, middle, and high school and never met until college. And thank God, because she was a Christian, I wasn't. But Jesus got me at just the right moment. And so we've been doing life and ministry together for 31 years. It's been a great ride.
That's beautiful. I love that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you guys kind of grew up in the same region but didn't know each other until a little later.
God's timing is perfect. I
love the God stories that I get to hear sometimes. And, Pastor Doug, I just want to say, as a friend, but also as a pastor who loves to look up to leaders that have been running the race maybe a couple years ahead and been on this journey for some time. I'm so thankful to have men like yourself as leaders and pastors that are really making an impact, making a difference. And I just want you to know your impact has made a difference for me in my leadership and for a lot of us who are close by, in addition to many that are far. And I'm excited to talk leadership with you. Specifically, I kind of want to kick it off with the kind of this concept of leadership, whether somebody's leading a church, whether they're leading an organization. There's different ways to lead. And something that you and I kind of touched on as we were preparing for this podcast is the importance from leading from a healthy soul. Can you just unpack a little bit some thoughts for our leaders and even pastors and ministry leaders that are connected right now on leading from a healthy soul?
Yeah, I think one of the most haunting questions of Jesus is a rhetorical question. What does it profit a person if they gain the entire world and lose their soul? And if you stop and just think about that question, it's an important question, which means you can be doing all of these things, successful in all of these ways, and lose yourself. And Jesus is not necessarily talking about like your eternal destination or heaven and hell. It's the Greek word suke. It's the soul. It's the way you think, the way you feel, the way you make decisions as part of your will. If that's not healthy, or you've lost your way, you're going to look back on your life with deep regret. And so, and I watch this happen with all types of leaders, pastors, business leaders, entrepreneurs, where they get so hyper focused on a certain thing that they neglect other things. And the other things they neglect, they think, I'll always have time to go on a date with my wife. I'll always have time to talk to my kids. I'll always have time to sit and rest and reflect or read God's word. But yet the frenetic pace is driving them toward success in all these other areas, and they can lose their soul. And so for me, like Proverbs 4:23 is like sort of a stake in the ground. Solomon says, guard your heart with all your diligence. It is the wellspring of your life. Everything comes from inside. So if your soul is not healthy, all the things that come out won't be healthy. And so just paying attention there is vitally important.
Yeah. As I hear you speak and as I think about it as well, I think it's interesting to me, the fact that sometimes, especially as leaders, we could easily let the urgent crowd out the important. And I think you were alluding to this. As from your experience, obviously in your journey, what are some of the consequences or maybe some of the negative results of leading from an unhealthy soul, whether it's personal, family, even ministerial for those of us who are in ministry? What are some of those things that you've seen or you've noticed, man, this can be affected really, really bad?
Yeah, I'll do that by telling you a story. I was with a soul care sort of mentor guru, and we were in a room together with like 15 significant leaders in our city. And she asked the question, what is it like when you're operating from a soul that's disconnected from God? And you heard things like fatigue, cynicism, an idea of coasting, an idea where you're on fumes, an idea where you're feeling more disillusioned, where you're going through the motions, where you're not feeling deep emotions of joy or sorrow. And as the room goes around, people had this sort of heavy feeling like, oh gosh, I'm feeling like 5 or 6 of these things right now because my pace is so fast. And then we talk about what is the long-term consequences of working past your limits. Because one of the things that we have to learn as human beings, how do we embrace our limits? And if we think I can handle it, your body has a governor. If you push your body too far, your body will break down. Your mind actually has a governor. You can have a mental breakdown when your brain gets overloaded, but your soul doesn't have a governor. It will allow you to push past those limits until you don't realize how far you've gone. And so I see people, finding ways to medicate that dissonance they feel. So I'm drinking more alcohol than normal. I drink alcohol to go to sleep. I drink caffeine to stay awake. I find myself medicating by looking at social media or sexual fantasies or kind of living my life vicariously through my kids or other leaders. And sort of what happens is you get a separation between your actual life and your soul, and that dissonance can get wider and wider and wider until literally, for some people they have a breakdown of some sort.
Yeah, that's good. What from maybe even from your experience or even your journey with soul care experts or even from what you've seen and been, maybe even admired in others, what do you think works? What helps when a pastor, a leader is saying, I want to be healthy in my soul? What are maybe some practical tips or things that maybe help you to say, man, I want to be healthy? Because we know physically there's things that we can do, physically, right? But when it comes to the soul, they're not always tangible. They're not always easy. What's helped you, or what have you seen?
Yeah, I think the biggest idea is the idea of rest. So, we have this opportunity to rest on a daily basis, to rest on a weekly basis, Sabbath, and to rest on an annual basis. And so the best leaders I know have figured out a daily rhythm of rest, a weekly rhythm of rest, and an annual rhythm of rest. And, my son is a really competitive athlete. He does high jump on the national stage.
Wow.
And he was like this close to the Olympics. And here's what the Olympic trainers would say to you. What separates a national champion from an Olympian is not how hard they work, but how well they rest.
Wow.
So you're talking about high tune precision athletes saying they're both working out at the same rate, but the ones that know how to rest their body, rest their muscles, rest their mind, compete best and perform the best in those moments. And so a lot of what my son Kennedy does is learning how to rest, learning how to focus, learning how to not do the work, but do the rest. And so the same thing is true spiritually. It's I've heard someone say, like, if you work with your hands, then rest with your mind. If you work with your mind, then rest with your hands. So most of my job and your job is working with your mind. You're thinking about ideas all the time. So I rest by mowing my lawn. I rest by playing basketball. I rest by, doing things physically and sweating, because then I'm not thinking about the next sermon or idea. And so I have to learn things personally that work for me on a daily, weekly basis. And then annually, one of the things I've discovered is just a time of retreat. Every summer now I take 24, 48 hours. I go to a house on a lake by myself, and I don't talk to a human being for 48 hours. I read through journals. I sit and reflect. I let whatever is in me come up, because it's in that solitude that things that you've stuffed down sort of come up. And so just being alone with your thoughts in the presence of God, the lack of health will come up and be revealed to you. And then you're like, well, I need to do something with that. I'm more sad or angry about that thing than I thought. And in that process, sitting alone with God will allow that to happen in beautiful ways.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. A couple years back, I remember tapping into Pete Scazzero's book. It's
Emotionally healthy
intentionally
leader.
healthy. Yeah. And emotionally healthy spirituality. And I remember thinking, wow, there's so much importance in taking time, because as leaders, there's so much to do. And if we are not careful, we will go and not rest, right? And we will avoid commandments like keeping the Sabbath day holy. And in addition to those rhythms of rest that you're talking about, I love that, because we can easily justify, especially as pastors, there's these very spiritual things that are needed, and people need us. But in order to
and
really be the best.
people say stupid things to us all the time. Like someone will say to a pastor typically, well, why you take a day off? The devil doesn't take a day off. And you're like, well, the devil's not my role model. God is. And if God rested, then we can rest. So sometimes we put pressure on ourselves, or we take the Bible out of context to justify our workaholism. Really, it's a Messiah complex for a lot of pastors to go, the church needs me. This person needs me. But the reality is, if you died tomorrow, the church would keep going, and the kingdom of God would keep growing, and God would keep working in the world. So it doesn't depend on us as much as we think it does.
That's good. Pastors, please take notes. Please pray about this, especially if you find yourself not consistently resting, not consistently observing the Lord's day, and truly stopping work, stopping from producing, worshiping the Lord, seeking God, enjoying a day of not working. I think this is so important. Connected to this, Pastor Doug, I think I love that we started there, because it's so easy as leaders to talk about things and go and do, but if we don't start from a healthy place, then we could be in trouble. And I know that a lot of us have seen pastors and leaders just get into places of trouble because of the unhealth, right? Because of the not resting. I want to segue a little bit, talking about culture. I think nowadays it's so important to consider, as a leader, what is our culture, right? And there's something that you touched on as we were sharing that caught my attention, because you don't always think about this, but there's a difference between building culture and rebuilding culture. Can you explain that a little bit with us?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a church planner and you start from scratch, you get to build something, beautiful. I mean, I had a chance to do that with a ministry called 4Kids, where we had an idea to do a foster care ministry and incorporate all the churches in South Florida. And so I got to be like an architect on the ground. What are our core values, and who do we hire that embodies those values, and how do we do this thing for Jesus in our city? And that was a 14-year building project. That was one of the coolest things I ever got to do. But then 10 years ago, I stepped into a role here at Calvary because of a moral failure of a founding pastor and some of those soul care things that just didn't happen behind the scenes. And there's some beautiful things about what was happening at our church at Calvary, but there was also some broken things and some cultural things. And so, now you're like, okay, what about the culture do we want to retain? The mission, the vision, those things are amazing, but how do we reorder the values? And so at Calvary at the time, we were just growing, by leaps and bounds every single year. Like everything was growing, and excellence was one of our key core values. But, soul care wasn't in the equation. And,
Wow.
And how we, sort of cared for people and prioritized, humility, rest, Sabbath, some of those sort of those foundational Christian formative things that just weren't really talked about. And so I think a lot about like Nehemiah during that time, because the book of Nehemiah is all about a rebuilding project. It's not
Yeah.
like you don't have a wall; you just have boulders everywhere. Like, what's that rock doing in the middle of the road? How do we get people organized? How do we reprioritize what's important? And the thing that sort of stuck with me about Nehemiah's project is he rebuilt the wall in 52 days, but it took him decades to rebuild the culture. And that's sort of, to me, a picture of what pastors do who come in and take over for another pastor. There's some beautiful things that are there and some things that need to be rebuilt. And that takes a patient, prayerful, thoughtful idea of what type of church or organization are we trying to build? And do we embody this cultural values, or are they just things on a wall or on a sticker?
That's good. I don't want to breeze by this, Pastor Doug, and I know it's not necessarily what you would want me to highlight, but I think I want to highlight the fact that you didn't step in, you didn't step in a church of maybe 250 congregants in a small town, somewhere in the U.S. You really stepped in to probably one of the largest ministries in the state of Florida, because there's a high level of weight that one can feel. Just for perspective for us, when you kind of stepped into the lead pastor role at Calvary Chapel, were there multiple campuses yet at that time?
Yeah, there were 10 campuses at the time. So
Yeah,
it was,
and we're talking about thousands of members and attendees on Sundays, correct?
yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah, that and a Christian school and a foster care organization and a recovery ministry, and I mean it's sort of like its own
yeah.
campus and ecosystem.
Yeah, so I want to mention that because obviously, it's one thing to steer a canoe, right? If you're going to change directions, it's one thing to steer, a speedboat. But when you're in a big ship, that is a significant responsibility. And can you share maybe what helped you? Whether it's on the practical side, whether it's on the organizational, administrative side, whether it's on the people side, what helped you be successful in that process, in that journey, which obviously wasn't a matter of days, like you mentioned, this is years, but what helped you in your process of coming into the leadership role of an existing multi-campus, thousands of members and other organizations connected to? What helped Doug Sauder?
Yeah, I think it's one is outside help. So we prayed about who's a thoughtful leader from the outside who can give us a perspective, so we don't get stuck in groupthink or just our own ideas. So we had a couple of mentors, Bob Barnes, who was a local pastor and leader here, Alan Platt, who moved from South Africa and followed me around for 3 months, members of our board and other pastors who were so willing to meet with me. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was, as you're rebuilding these values, you might have an idea of what they are, but you want the people to form them with you. So just to give you an idea, we had probably 600 to 700 staff at the time. So you're trying to enculturate 600 to 700 people in a new set of shared values. And this leader said to me, "You need to take 1 year to figure out those values." And I'm like, we can't wait a year. We got some issues culturally where we're hemorrhaging. We need to redefine the culture, reset the pace. And this leader said, no, you need to sit and meet with as many of the staff as possible and just ask them this question. How do you want to be treated as you work here? What do you want to see valued as you work here? And we basically spent a year coming up with 7 core values that the people picked, but I got to say that 6 of the 7 were the ones I'd already picked. And it was beautiful to watch as we unrolled them. Every month we enrolled another one. We unveiled another one at a staff huddle, and we modeled them. We talked about behaviors of what does this look like, and it was such a better process than I would have come up with, just going, I got to fix it now. So patience, outside voices, and allowing the people that are there, that are vested, that are all into the mission and vision, helping you to frame what this new values, what these values look like.
That's good. I like that. I like that because one thing you just mentioned, which I think is so huge, and I think as pastors we need to learn is we don't have all the answers. So having the voices of some people, some wise people, they might be older, they might be younger, they might have certain
Hmm.
experience or expertise, and what a blessing it is to have those right voices to help us make the right choices along the journey. That's a great example. Now you mentioned the whole concept of rebuilding culture, right? Um, there's also a challenge when it comes to, okay, we've built or we've been rebuilding. How do we maintain the culture? How do we keep the right culture going and flowing?
Yeah, this again. I go back to the book of Nehemiah. You're watching. Nehemiah. Every time he fixes something, something else breaks. It's like whack-a-mole. You're like, okay, I got that right. Now this is broken over here. I got that right. This is right over here. And so I think you're constantly looking to maintain, just like you do in your own home. How do I keep a spiritual presence in my home? Did I remember to pray with my wife? Did I remember to talk to my kids? It's not enough to say that those things are important. Are they actually happening in practice? And sometimes you have to have a family meeting. Hey guys, let's huddle.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, this is what we're about. In our case, we're the Sauder family. We're all for one, one for all. This is what we're about. So let's have a family meeting and just redefine what we all agree is important in this family. And so it's a lot of those conversations individually sometimes with your leadership team and pastors, sometimes with the entire staff. So one of the ways that we do that is we talk about our values at our huddles, at our get-togethers. We
Mm-hmm.
talk about, hey guys, soul keeping is one of our values. So we're going to share a story about what someone did this summer to have a solitude retreat and the outcome of that. And we're going to talk again about this principle in Scripture. And so those values are being articulated in our monthly or quarterly meetings and reinforced with examples, positive examples of how people are doing this, to sort of provoke people to go, oh, I could do that. And so that's really, it's a constant thing.
Yeah.
Because we say this at Calvary all the time. Who you are is more important than what you do. So we
Mm-hmm.
say the values of this place, are what undergird the mission and the vision, because we're these type of people. And if we make disciples in a way that feels off, then it's not going to be the same thing, because discipleship is reproducing yourself in other people. And so we want to have those values and embody them
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Another thing that I know is so important as a pastor myself, but especially when you're leading a church and a ministry that's large and growing and expanding on the staff side of things, is leadership development. What are a couple thoughts that you have when it comes to leadership development? How can we get better at leadership development? What systems can we put in place? What have you seen work or work well in the context of what Calvary's doing and in your time leading as a pastor?
Yeah, every time I talk to pastors, what's the one thing you need the most? Is like, I need leaders. We call it the leadership famine. We have more things to do than we have leaders to do them. And so, I think in Luke 6:40, Jesus says, the student who is fully trained will look like his teacher.
Hmm.
And it's a simple, definition of discipleship. How do we train people to be like us? How do we, as we follow Jesus, how do we have other people follow? So there's two aspects of this. I think one is the staff pipelines, and then the volunteer pipelines. So I'll start with
Yeah.
volunteers. A lot of pastors, small churches don't have any staff. So your pipeline is your volunteers. It's the guy who
Right.
shows up and teaches Sunday school or parks cars or helps with hospitality or leads you a new believer, encourage your moments. And for me, I've always found, find the small group of people, the 10, the 12, the 15, and really go deep with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excuse me. And when you focus on replicating yourself in 12, 15, 20, and then charge them to do the same with their groups, if you're going to go big, you got to go small. And going small means not just a meeting once a month, but life together during that month, and say, hey guys, we're going to go on a journey for the next year. We're going to meet together every week. And I want to impart to you some of my favorite books and leadership principles and just life together. We'll do outreach together. We'll do baptisms together. We'll go share our faith together. We'll serve together. I want you to get to know me. And now after the year, I want you to do that with someone else. So that volunteer model, I've always tended to want to go big, but I figured out you got to go small to go big. And that was Jesus' model. I mean, you look at the last, several months of his life, he spent more and more time with just Peter, James, and John. those 3.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing if you have not a lot of time left, the smaller you go, the more effective you'll be long term. When it comes to staff, it's the same thing. In our organization now, we have like 800 employees between a church and school, and so I'm always looking for who are the next 10 or 15 leaders that I can invest in intentionally. And we created a formal structure we call it Ethos. We take probably 50 to 60 of our best leaders at all of our campuses, bring them all together for a six-month process of training. And we give them not just doctrine or practice, but culture. This is our story. We tell lots of organizational ministry stories. This is the ethos of Calvary. We jump in the dumpster and we do the dirty work. We believe in faith, and here's a story that illustrates that. So everything is story oriented based on people that have been part of the journey of Calvary for the last 39 years. And then we invite them, you get in the story. What's your role going to be? So you're enculturating people over a 6-month intentional process of discipleship that's large group teaching and then small group tables. And, it took us 2 years to create that curriculum. And
I love
we
that.
keep on tweaking it, because to me, that's our most important group, because we're enculturating the next pastors, directors, leaders, elders, deacons at all of our campuses. And that's how we go together, because we're learning together, growing together, serving together for a concentrated period of time.
I like that. The concept of having a system in place where we're constantly identifying those people and kind of inviting them into a journey to see, hey, maybe these are some next people that might be coming on board, whether it's staff, leadership, or high level volunteer leadership. Especially as the church is growing, I find that the church grows, but we also need that leadership pool to grow as well. I love that. I'd love, Pastor Doug, kind of on the final stretch of the conversation, I'd love to touch a little bit on unity. We've talked a little bit about leading from a healthy soul, valuable. We've talked a little bit about church culture and even leadership development. Something that's been neat is to see what the Lord has been doing in our South Florida region. And I know in other regions of Florida and even the States, we're seeing kind of church unity rise up. And I'm so proud and thankful to be part of Church United. Church United was literally kind of born in the hearts of some leaders and pastors, including yourself here in South Florida, in a time where I think the church needed to see some collaboration, some unity, and also as pastors, kind of developing relationships and being there for each other. Can you talk a little bit about the heart of Church United and how it was born?
Yeah, I think it was born out of brokenness, out of our church going through a crisis and other churches coming to pray for us and serve us and really being for us in a time where, other churches could see us as competition, but instead it was, you're a brother, you're a partner, we're all in this together. And so that just kept getting multiplied in all these different situations. If there was a crisis, if there was a moment that we could go together, we kept asking ourselves the question, what can we do together that we can't do on our own? And so I experienced that, leading 4 kids for over a decade, where one church could not solve the foster care crisis. We needed hundreds of churches to all mobilize their people to care for vulnerable orphans. And, when we look at the numbers, 40,000 kids after about 25 years, 700 of them got adopted into families. Many more got reunified. So many of them have come to know Jesus. That was a what can we do together with all of these churches?
Yeah.
And that's why I just asked the question, if we did it in foster care, or we do it in homelessness or elder care, can we do it as churches for the city? Can we be pastors for the city? And as we began to talk about and pray through that process, these beautiful collaborations have happened that have made us way more effective together than we would have been individually.
Along that journey, because I remember kind of being invited in, early on, but obviously there was a couple of pastors that were with you in the beginning. Did you imagine kind of the momentum and the synergy that we would gain? I mean, did you imagine that on the front end? How was it in those first conversations?
Yeah, well, I'd say the first time, you read John 17, you hear, God wants to, Jesus' heart is that the church could be one so that the world could know. You're like, I love the idea, I love the verse, but I wonder, could it happen?
Uh-huh.
And so when we began this journey in the early 2000s with 4 kids, I didn't expect it to be as big and grow as fast as it did and be as influential as it was. So by the time I got to 2014, I had already experienced Ephesians 3:20. Our God is able to immeasurably more than you could ask or imagine, because it's his power that is at work within us. So once you sort of undersell or underbelieve God's promise, and then you experience it, you sort of have a humble, sober expectation that he could do it again and do it bigger. And so this time, as I watch it happen, I'm like, this is a very familiar feeling. Like, it doesn't make sense, and it shouldn't be working this way, but God is breathing on it, and we're watching it happen. And then when you read like Psalm 133, there's a beauty when brothers dwell together, because it's this place that God commands a blessing. And you're like, oh, this is a very rare like sentence in Scripture. God is commanding a blessing over his brothers that are working and dwelling together in unity. And so I've experienced that feeling and the outcomes more than once. And so God's taken my little mustard seed of faith and expanded it.
I like that. I like that. I love conversations like this, Pastor Doug, because it's an opportunity to hear a little bit the heart, behind leaders and pastors who really have been a blessing to so many people. I want to, in the final minutes, I kind of want to maybe ask a couple on the personal side, right? Questions. And here's a question that I want to ask you, because I think it takes a little bit of thought, right? And I'll give it to you on the front end and talk a little bit so you can think about it. But here's my question. You've been in the lead pastor role now, probably about 10 years, maybe a little bit more than that, be associate pastor for many years before that, and obviously in leadership positions in ministry. If you could go back to 20-year-old Doug, right, to the young early 20s Doug, and you could give your younger self some pieces of advice for life and family and ministry, what are some of those top bullet point things that you would say to your younger self?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing I would say is, avoid the temptation to try to prove yourself, or to try to prove that, they made the right decision by hiring you. I think in your 20s and 30s, you're trying to prove, like, they didn't make a mistake by making me the pastor. They didn't make a mistake by hiring me. And you're sort of like trying to prove that they made the right choice and you're the right guy.
Uh-huh.
By the time you get into your 40s, you're exhausted by trying to keep up with their expectations or your own expectations of yourself. And so I just say, like, be yourself. Don't try to prove anything. And you can work hard and ease into the role that God has given you. Those are both possible. And I've now that I'm in my 50s, I still work hard. I'm probably the first person here every morning. But there's an ease by which I lead today that I did not lead in my 20s and 30s. And
that's good.
It's a surrender that ultimately this church does not depend on me. And ultimately one day I'm either going to retire or leave or die, and the church is going to go on, and it doesn't depend on me. But while I'm here, I can still carry the baton, work hard, be thoughtful, do the best job I can. But also, go home by 5:30 and be with my wife and my kids and be present with my family. And, fortunately I had a good wife who I'll just say she wisely provoked me to come home. She would say things like this. I'd say, hey, we have a study on Monday night, and we have this meeting on Tuesday night. We have this thing on Wednesday night, and God's really, stirring this thing. And, she saw through all that, and she just said, when are you going to see your kids this week? And just that question, like, snapped me out of my illusion that, running the world or running the church or changing the world for Jesus was all dependent on me. And so I would just say, prioritize your marriage, your family, work hard, but surrender the process.
Yeah, that's good. I don't know how all of our wives have the ability to do that. I think it must be the Holy Spirit speaking through them to us. I love that.
The Proverbs say that a gentle word can break a bone.
Exactly. All right, so here's a couple of kind of lightning round, fast response questions. Pastor Doug, what makes you laugh?
What makes me laugh? My kids make me laugh. Watching people be themselves make me laugh. Playing basketball makes me laugh. I love living life.
I love that. I love that. What aspect of ministry or pastoring is kind of one of your favorites? There's a lot of things that we do, but what would you say? Yeah, this is one of my favorite things.
Yeah, two favorite things. One is, after a message, calling people to come to know Jesus and seeing the look in their face, seeing the look in
Yes.
someone's face when God turns on the lights. There's no other feeling like that in the entire world.
Mm-hmm.
And then closely related to that is watching someone do something for the first time, watching someone preach for the first time, lead worship for the first time, lead a small group, do an announcement for the first time, because you can see like they're scared to death and God meets them and it's going to be the first of many things they do. And you got to be part of the coaching, cheering section of
Uh-huh.
watching them, be there first.
Yeah, that's good. As you look out at today's culture and society, what breaks your heart?
Yeah, I think the division within the church. So what's out there doesn't have to get in here, but often
Right.
it does, and it's because of the voices we listen to and the way sometimes we disregard the scripture. And so, just to me, the most disheartening thing is the way Christians treat other Christians in areas where they disagree. We can disagree, but division is a choice, and
Right.
a lot of Christians have chosen division as their mode of operation in this world we live in.
Yeah, that's good. Last question here. What encourages you or excites you about the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing a growing move toward prayer. I'm seeing a growing move toward community and just the simplicity of the Christian life and faith. I'm watching, people go against the flow of division and work together in unity. So I'm so encouraged by the leaders I know, what's happening in South Florida. I mean, what's happening here is not happening everywhere in the
Right.
country. It's something beautiful and unique. And I always tell people, usually the stage is really good and the backstage is not as good, but what we're watching behind the scenes here in South Florida is actually better than what's happening on the front stage, and that is a very rare and beautiful thing. And you've got to see it, I've got to see it,
Yeah.
and I can't wait to see how God's going to breathe on that and expand it in beautiful ways.
Yeah, I believe that. As we close off, Pastor Doug, I know from my friendship with you, I know you're not the social media buff, right? That's all over social media.
Yeah, no.
But if people want to lean in and learn more about Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale, what's the website and where can they find out some more information?
Yeah, if you just go to calvaryftl.org, that's the website, Calvary FTL on social. I post on Instagram once a year at most, and on Facebook once every 2 or 5 years, whatever it is. But yeah, the messages and the things we're prioritizing at Calvary are available in all the different things. And
Yeah.
but yeah,
Hey, if you want to get
my
that
life
one
is
post,
simpler without that.
if you want to get that one post per year, I challenge you to find Doug Sauder on social media.
All right.
CalvaryFTL.org. Hey, everybody, if you haven't done so, you can subscribe to our AVAIL journal. We have a free trial subscription. It's good to get resources in your hands. The AVAIL journal, I always say it's a beautiful journal that has great content from great leaders and pastors from around the world. As leaders, we want to be resourced in great ways. In addition to the Bible, there's great leaders out there that have great resources. So check us out by going to availjournal.com, free trial subscription. Pastor Doug, what an awesome opportunity to spend some time in this format, talking leadership. I've really enjoyed it. On behalf of our AVAIL team, Dr. Sam Chand, Martijn Van Tilburg, who are the founders of AVAIL, I just want to say that we are honored to have you. We honor you. We bless you. We're thankful for your life, for your family, and for the ministry that God has given you.
Thanks, Verge. It's mutual. Love you.
Yes, sir. Hey, everybody, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with Pastor Doug Sauder, talking a little bit about church culture, talking about maintaining culture, talking about leadership development, talking about leading from a healthy soul, and the importance of unity in the body as pastors and churches. Hope you've been blessed and encouraged. Remember, if you want to lean in and find out more about Calvary Church in Fort Lauderdale, you can go online to calvaryftl.org. On behalf of AVAIL, my name is Virgil Sierra, lead pastor of Vertical Church, aka Iglesia Vertical, your host here on the AVAIL podcast, where we talk leadership and we help encourage you to keep growing. Be blessed, everybody, and we'll catch you next time right here on the AVAIL podcast. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the AVAIL podcast with our guest, Doug Sauder. For more leadership resources, check us out at theartofleadership.com. And make sure to claim your free trial subscription of the AVAIL Journal at availjournal.com. As always, I'm your AVAIL podcast host, Virgil Sierra. Muchas gracias. Thank you for connecting with us to learn the art of leadership here at the AVAIL podcast.